Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us from wherever you are for AI and the Law, Regulation, and Opportunity. My name is Emily Bembenek. I'm the director of the Center for Applied AI here at Chicago Booth. If you aren't familiar with us, we're a research group here within the Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago. Our work focuses primarily on how AI can support people, understand markets, and improve society. We primarily try to understand how machine intelligence and human intelligence differ and how we can use those differences to improve decision-making across domains like healthcare, criminal justice, finance, etc. Today, we're looking at how regulation is and will be shaping AI for business and for individuals in the coming months and years. We have an amazing panel lined up to talk to you about this, and I'm looking forward to the conversation myself. Moderating for us today is Professor Randy Picker, the James Parker Hall Distinguished Service Professor of Law here at the University of Chicago Law School. Randy, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can get the conversation started. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Emily and Lauren. Studio Polar, who also helped organize this. So thrilled to be here. So we're going to do quick introductions around the room and then turn to substance. So Rachel, perhaps you could tell us who you are.
Sure. Hi, I'm Rachel Annier. I'm a partner at a global law firm, Freshfields Brookhouse Deringer. I specialize in data and tech regulation, and I'm based in London.
Perfect. Dee, we'll go to you next.
Hey everyone, my name is Dee Choubei. First of all, I'm a proud alumni of the University of Chicago, so glad to be here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Moneyline. Moneyline is a publicly traded fintech. We help American consumers make their best financial decision through our mobile app, as well as through our embedded financial marketplaces that are used by over 1,100 clients and financial services. So we've been practitioners of artificial intelligence and have a lot to say about the applicability of it, as well as America's role in developing this incredible next phase of technological advancements. Glad to be on this panel.
Always thrilled when our alums go off and do great things. So that's fantastic. Arsen, you're up next.
I'm Arsen Karimyan. I'm a partner at Mayer Brown. I practice in AI governance, data privacy, and cybersecurity law, and I'm based in Los Angeles.
Great. And then Andre, you're the last to go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andre Uhl. I'm a postdoc here at the University of Chicago. I am teaching courses on AI literacy here. Previously, I have been involved in the ethics and governance of AI for about a decade, and I look forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Okay, so a great panel with a nice set of differences. So the question we're going to start with first is a question about try to get a sort of a jurisdictional legal framing in place. We could obviously do that for multiple hours. We're not going to do that. We're going to do that for roughly 10 minutes. So Rachel's going to start for us. She's going to do a little UK and EU, and then we're going to turn to Arsen for a United States perspective.
Great. Thank you, Brandy. I'll kick off with the UK, although more people will be familiar with what's going on in the EU. The UK is my home turf, so we're going to start there. Just a little bit of context setting for those of you who aren't familiar. The UK really sees AI as an important part of its kind of domestic growth strategy. And probably a topic for another day, but it kind of culminated really in trying to push itself to the forefront of the global stage in launching the Global AI Safety Summit last autumn to really sort of stake its name in relation to AI. The approach it's taking in particular is a key differentiator from the EU following Brexit, and it's a real opportunity to sort of position itself as a global superpower. And it has been doing so for quite a few years, and there were quite a lot of predecessor kind of things that it was doing before it launched a white paper in March last year, and that really sort of set out its approach to regulation of AI. I think the key distinction to note is that there's not going to be new legislation. We'll come on to discuss what's happening in the EU there. Rather, there is a broadly principles-based approach based on cross-regulatory cooperation. It's designed to be pro-innovation, to allow kind of flexibility for existing regulators to keep pace with the fast-moving technology, and sort of do that within their existing regulatory frameworks, but with the addition of some central coordination. It's focused around 5 key principles, which will be familiar to those sort of looking at global principles, OECD, for example. So these are safety, security, and robustness, transparency and explainability, accountability and governance, fairness and contestability, and redress. We're yet to see kind of huge amounts of color as to what will be different for AI regulation, but the government's now called on each of the individual regulators to set out their strategy. I think by the end of this month, some of those have started to come out with what they're going to do. So we've seen from the competition authority, the CMA, it's kind of focus on foundation models and looking at the impact of things like compute data on markets and the kind of interconnected value chains and things like that. So it's coming at it from a competition and consumer perspective. We have the data regulator coming at it from a data perspective. And of course, those who've been watching kind of tech regulation more broadly in the UK will know Ofcom, our communications regulator, has the new remit under online safety. So they're really working to build up kind of their capability and identify what risks exist in the AI space for the kind of online safety world.
And who, can I ask, who made this decision high level in the UK to say, we're going to run with this? We want this to be a strategic country priority.
So that will have been developed cross-government. So it would have been the Conservative government really where that originated. They've been in power for quite a while, but it's got broad cross-party support. However, we are having conversations, as many places around the world are having elections this year, and some of the sort of noises that Labour, if they get into power, may introduce legislation. And there have been calls from various areas of government, so sort of House of Lords committees, asking for legislation and saying this kind of regulatory approach isn't going far enough. So there may be changes.
Got it. Okay, so switch to the EU. Give us a quick sense there, and then we'll go to arson.
So in the EU, we obviously have the EU AI Act, which is very nearly on the statute books. The latest I've heard is June, so it's all but there. And that looks a completely different approach to have harmonized rules for kind of safe AI systems. And it's very broad, covers a broad range of participants from providers, deployers, manufacturers, and it also has a very broad territorial scope. So not just where you're in the EU, but outside as well. It has a tiered risk-based framework. So from prohibited AI uses, which is kind of an unacceptable level of risk, things like emotional recognition and use of subliminal techniques. But then the next tier down is high-risk systems. So things like biometric identification, creditworthiness, so things that are really impactful, and they are permitted, but there are quite a lot of rules around them with what's called a conformity assessment, so technical documentation, registration, things like that. But then the next tier down is a limited risk system, so things like chatbots, which have sort of a slightly less restrictive regime around transparency. And then we have minimal risks where there's allowed without additional obligations. There's one thing that sort of came in during the legislative process around general purpose AI and foundation models. As you may recall, that sort of all developed quite quickly in the public eye as the act was progressing. So there are also some additional things around that. And then we also have the new regimes around sort of enforcement. So who's going to enforce? And probably the thing on most people's minds are kind of the fines. The maximum goes up to 35 million euros or 7% of global annual turnover for the most serious infringements. But I think we're not going to start seeing those really until 2026.
Okay, that's good. So I think I read the 2021 draft of the EU AI Act, and it's amazing how out of date that seems so quickly. All right, Arson, tell us about the United States.
Yeah, the US is taking also a principles-based and sector-specific approach, similar to the UK's pro-innovation approach to AI regulation. Basically, it all started with the White House releasing on October 2022 the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, and similar to the UK white paper that came out in March of 2023. It talks about the principles applicable to AI, such as safe and effective systems, avoiding algorithmic discrimination, data privacy, notice and explanation, and having a human alternative and fallback. A year later, after that blueprint came out, the White House also released this executive order, essentially giving direction to the federal agencies to provide further guidance and implement certain principles related to AI governance. And so that is in the process at the moment. So along with that, the approach on a federal level that the US is taking is that they're using their existing enforcement authorities to enforce AI regulations. So for example, the Federal Trade Commission has a broad authority under the Unfair and Deceptive Practices Act, Section 5 of the FTC Act, to enforce deceptive practices. And the way they've been doing that in connection with regulating AI is that if AI discriminates or demonstrates any bias, then they can bring an action against businesses for deceptive practices or unfair practices. Or if somebody's personal information was used to train an AI model without their consent or proper transparency. We've seen a situation where the Federal Trade Commission has disgorged an AI model because it wasn't properly trained. So that's like the most severe consequences if you invested a lot of money in AI. Other federal authorities like the Department of Justice, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, along with the EEOC, they're also viewing AI abuses within their domain. So for example, with the Department of Justice, they're looking at discrimination in housing, employment, lending, and voting. The CFPB is looking at adverse credit decisions and whether there's a sufficient explanation as to why there was a credit decision that was adverse to a consumer. And then in the employment context, the EEOC is monitoring discrimination in the employment context and adverse impacts. So that's on a federal level. On a state level, we're actually seeing something a little bit different. Very much in line with the EU. On the one hand, we're seeing regulation of AI under data privacy laws. A number of states are rapidly passing data privacy laws. And one of the rights afforded under data privacy laws is to opt out of automated decision-making or profiling that can have a legal or similarly significant effect on someone. And some of the additional obligations are preparing appropriate data protection impact assessments when certain AI processing activities are happening, along with transparency regarding the use of AI. And then we're also seeing a number of bills, many of them on a state level, which have a light version of the EU AI Act. So it's very much focused on high-risk areas of processing related to AI, such as in the context of employment and housing and lending, insurance, basically situations where it's going to have a big impact on someone's life. And very much in line with the EU AI Act, you have to do risk management, have a transparency and explainability notices. The developers of AI need to give instructions of use to the deployers of AI. So we're seeing a little bit of a mixed bag in the US, and that's largely stemming from the fact that on a federal level, we still don't have an omnibus AI law or a privacy law that would preempt these state laws. And so for this reason, we're seeing this fragmented approach.
Great. That's super helpful. So let me I think I got that. So it's federal level, pre-existing rules, they're running with those. State level, more action, it's easier for them to move, tracking a little bit what's going on in Europe. I saw in the Q&A, and let me flag the Q&A, so I want to push that. We're going to go to Q&A eventually here. I saw someone raised a question about Gen AI and copyright. Absolutely a big issue. I teach copyright, lots of pending cases. The OpenAI, Microsoft, New York Times cases, maybe the most prominent. So a bunch of really interesting issues there that we will definitely be wrestling with. All right, we've heard from the lawyers a bunch. Now we're going to put the lawyers to the side temporarily, and we're going to turn to some other perspectives. So Dee, I want to go to you next if we could, right? I guess I'm interested in understanding, as someone running a business, right? How do you see maybe the right way to think about regulation, the right timeline for regulation? Do you say, let's not do that. Let's just go. Tell us about your perspective.
Well, look, I think Arsene said it well, that the United States already has a pretty interesting mesh system of regulations around data, right? So the priors in place that were here before we kind of came along to this incredible revolution in artificial intelligence was, number one, whose data is it?
Yeah.
So in financial services, right? So Moneyline, we operate a fintech platform, but really think of it as an interface layer on top of a broker-dealer, on a registered investment advisor, a bank, and then we take all of our capabilities that we provide directly to the consumer, and we white label that and provide it to the largest financial institutions, the largest publishers. So you can imagine the amount of data that's being collected on our systems is pretty incredible, right? So we see 205 million inquiries a year, tens of millions of American consumers coming through our systems. So first of all, if you look at the last 10 years, the European Union had open banking. The CFPB in the United States really came up with the 1033 rulemaking, which is still in a rulemaking format, but really it's espousing this idea that financial transaction data belongs to the consumer. It doesn't necessarily belong to Chase or Wells Fargo or Citi or Moneyline. It belongs to the consumer. And the consumer is then allowed to passport that data across various different platforms. So now that has become more or less the modus operandi in the industry. And when that happens as a prior, now you can all of a sudden start really kind of ascertaining what is the consumer impact of that data now passporting across the internet. The consumer is in control. They can make the next best offer. They can really kind of go and understand it in a way that in the prior years, you'd need a CFP, you'd need a expensive financial advisor. So now all of a sudden, we're now ushered into an era where AI financial assistance, chatbots, your ability to get insights from your own data are incredibly powerful. Now, of course, there are opportunities here for biases to emerge into these large language models, right? The technology is fairly new, right? The reason why companies like Moneyline aren't rushing to put it in front of the consumer in the application layer is because we're still figuring out, is ChatGPT OpenAI the best model to use, or is it Bedrock from Amazon, or is it Llama from Facebook, or is it Anthropics, or is it sort of Perplexity? It's still so early in the development of these foundational models that, I think that we need a little bit of runway to be able to go figure out what good looks like and what's really good for the consumer. But that's where we have to fall back, that while you're making those experimentations, while you're testing the application layer for what is good for the consumer and what products are really needed by society and which products are deleterious for society, I think the interesting thing from a practitioner's perspective is we still have to comply with all of the privacy and data governance laws. We still have to be incredibly transparent, or otherwise the consumer will never trust us with their data, right? And when we talk about trusting us with their data, consumers are logging into Moneyline and linking their bank accounts through open banking, right? There are technologies out there like Plaid and Finicity and Akoya that allow you technologically through APIs to passport your data. No one will give you that data if they thought that you were doing anything unscrupulous with it, right? So I think that
let me just see if I understand. So I think I get. So an existing set of regulations that make this passport regime work, as I understand it.
Yep.
Right? Those are either good regulations or bad regulations, but they are the law of the land we have now. And now the question is, as AI emerges on top of that, right? What's the new thing we need? And what I'm hearing, I think, is you want to move slowly to figure out what's going to happen in the marketplace before we move to regulation.
Exactly. You want competition, right? You have big tech. Companies like Moneyline are small tech, right? So the big tech companies have incredible advantages in the data that they already have, right? So if they're going to rush to Washington and say, hey, look, we're only going to codify the Meta or the Apple or the Google, or pick your big tech company of choice, that way of doing it, then smaller players like ourselves who are kind of playing catch up because we don't have the benefit of 20 years of the internet's data, And then you get into all the sort of the copyright laws that you just mentioned through Microsoft.
Yep.
That training data needs to be espoused organically, right? And you have to give us a shot to actually go and barter that training data with the consumer.
Great. Let's get another perspective. So Andre, you're going to tell us a little bit of an ethical perspective, a little bit of an, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so I think what we can all hear from the previous speakers is that there is a significant transformation and shift in how the tech industry is being publicly perceived. Right, the public image of the tech industry has changed over past decades. In the early days, it was largely seen as a beacon of innovation and progress, and there was this narrative dominated by garage startups turning into global corporations. And it's kind of like embodying the American dream, right? Companies like Apple, Microsoft, or later Google, they were all celebrated for a long time for their groundbreaking technology breakthroughs and research and the perceived benefits that they cause and bring to society. But as their influence expanded, and especially more recently with the emergence of advanced AI systems, there has been also a growing recognition of potential negative impacts, which are oftentimes unintended or unanticipated. But these in recent years included high-profile data breaches, concerns about the rise of monopolistic practices, right, like of tech giants, and also more recently the role of social media and politics. These are just a few examples, but what they have caused is basically a public backlash against the unchecked power of tech companies. And it also led to the emergence of a new innovation paradigm that is not anymore focused only on the exponential growth of technology, but more so on ethics and regulation, right? We've heard already some of the regulatory landscapes that are emerging currently. But I believe that the regulatory practices that are currently being put in place are not only to prevent harm to consumers or to societies at large, but also to promote again a public trust in technology because the public image has been so tarnished. And in the discourse of AI ethics, it's a fairly new discourse. It has emerged over the last 10 years, I would say, to really address not only the societal impacts of the technologies, but also allowing scholars from a broad field of disciplines to look inside the workings, how AI systems are actually being constructed and how they come to make decisions for us and what these decisions actually bear for consequences in our lives. And there are certain principles that have emerged. Rachel has addressed some of them already by explaining UK's and EU's approach. But three of the main principles that I would like to highlight here are fairness, accountability, and transparency. These are some of the main themes, and many of you might have heard about them already. A famous conference about AI ethics and governance is even named after them. But basically, they are all addressing kind of a set of interrelated issues that have been recognized as a core theme in AI ethics. So when we're talking about fairness, it relates to growing discoveries that highlighted how AI can inherit or even exacerbate social biases that are either embedded in the training data or in the algorithms that are designed to interpret those data. That includes, for example, racial bias and facial recognition technology. There has been amazing work being done to uncover those aspects, and also gender bias and job recommendation algorithms, right? There's a whole trove of research that is currently emerging to uncover basically what is going on beyond the system that gives us the impression to be a seemingly objective and neutral tool to help us make better decisions. However, it has been recognized that those decisions are actually still flawed with human error and also prejudices.
So when you look at, can I ask, when you see a situation, and I don't want to pick on one company, but when you see a situation like the Google Gemini situation, where all of the controversy about the images it would generate or wouldn't generate, as you look at a situation like that through your approach, do you say, I understand why Google is perceived to have failed, or how do you see that?
I understand how Google is perceived to being failed. So in terms of, so when we are seeing certain AI systems creating flawed outputs, I think a lot of times it is about recognizing in hindsight some of the blind spots that have been embedded in those systems, right? And actually the theme of accountability that I also mentioned addresses the issue of being capable of identifying who is to be held liable when some of these systems are actually causing harm, right? It is a complex network of different actors collaborating to make an AI system work. And so there are famous examples like accidents of self-driving cars that are being highly debated in AI ethics circles in terms of who should be held accountable when there's an accident. Is it a driver? Is it a designer of the AI technology? Is it a tech company? Is it the user interface designer? There are so many actors that actually contribute for an AI system to be integrated. So a lot of times it is not as easy to untangle those decision-making and accountability processes. And that's actually at stake when we're talking about AI ethics, right? We are, in my field, wrestling also with the complexity that a discourse holds for us. And it is important to stay with that in order not to come to reductionist conclusions.
Okay, good. I want to come back briefly, at least, I guess, to Rachel and Arsen. Having heard this discussion now, we brought in a couple of other perspectives. How well do you think your respective legal systems, as if you run them, yes, exactly. How well you think your respective legal systems are grappling with the concerns and issues that Dee and Andre have surfaced? Rachel, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, and I think it's probably different for both the EU and the UK. And I think it's a very hard global problem to manage, and which is why I think we're seeing different approaches that are all rational, and we don't yet know how those are going to impact sort of people and how those are going to impact kind of innovation. So the EU, for example, what Dee was saying about needing a bit of space to be able to innovate, to be able to test the new technology before the regulation kind of comes down, their risk almost is that they are limiting innovation too much, right? Time will tell, but they may be on the balance of more safety but less innovation, right? That's sort of their balance. Whereas the UK, the opposite is true, that they're trying to really give space for innovation and allow the regulators that exist the flexibility to manage some of the issues that Andre was talking about, the interconnectedness and liability and how those play out in different fields. But is that going to be at the cost of safety, which is why I think they're majoring in safety in other forums? And there is no, one is obviously this way and obviously that way. It's just they've chosen slightly different paths, and I think we'll sort of have to see how they play out.
But that, just as I understood it, really focuses on the question of to what extent do we think we can have, sort of a native industry in this area or not? And if you don't think so, I can't tell if that's the EU's posture, then, regulating and making sure that you have maximal protection for your citizens seems like a natural approach.
It will depend, I think, on which member state you're in the EU.
Okay, Arsen, please.
Yeah, I think in the US, there are laws already on the books that provide protection for some of the concerns we're observing with AI. And I can give some concrete examples. So one of the common principles of AI is transparency and explainability. If you're going to use somebody's data to train an AI model and the type of decisions it's going to make, there are existing privacy laws that address that issue. If you're going to collect somebody's data and train the model, and then what type of decisions you will make, you need to give a privacy notice before collecting their data. You need to give certain opt-out rights. I think the problem, at least in the privacy field, is that we're at about like 17 states now with privacy laws, but what about the rest of the states? And then also, how do you address that if you're a multinational or multi-state company in the US, and you have to comply with these various privacy laws? I mean, there's some common elements to it, and you can certainly do it in a harmonized manner. But that's why there's a clamor by the business and consumer side to have a federal law that preempts this, so that this particular issue can be addressed on a national level. When it comes to fairness and bias, as I mentioned, there is existing authority depending on the zone of responsibility, if it's the Federal Trade Commission, EEOC in the employment context, and then even on a state level, there's many Unfair and Deceptive Practices Act statutes, consumer protection statutes, employment laws that would provide protection for discriminatory impacts that AI may have. And then also, of course, if there is a security incidents related to AI, there's already laws in the book to address that with data breach notification laws, for example. So I think there's already laws on the book there to provide protection. However, I do think that it'll be helpful to codify some of the OECD type of AI principles and have essentially the enforcement authorities have guideposts to bring their enforcement actions or to release guidance materials regarding real life use cases. The one concern I have with over-regulation of AI is that the moment the law comes on the books, it's going to be outdated. And so that neither benefits consumers nor business. Like, for example, if we're talking about the EU AI Act, it's actually a product safety law. And some of the text in there talking about putting a CE mark on the package of your AI. I mean, in the AI context, sort of sounds silly to have a mark on a package. It's not a tangible widget you're delivering. It's usually through online mechanisms and API integrations that you're getting an AI tool. And so that's the one concern with this overregulation, which is you have like very specific requirements, and then the moment it's released, technology already advances, and now it's outdated.
Okay, good. I see questions coming in the Q&A box, so keep having those come in. Maybe we can, I'm looking at those right now, so maybe we'll grab one. And that relates to the question of sort of corporate governance, specifically the OpenAI situation, where if you know they really started as a nonprofit, then they moved to a cap profit model. There was obviously this brief window when Sam Altman seemed like he was going to be well out on the street, and then he's back. And so we haven't talked much about the role of private actors and how they can shape how this develops. So can we talk a little bit about corporate governance, whether that's a good tool for addressing some of these issues, whether that's part of the competition that Dee was talking about, or whether you think that corporate governance is ultimately not the right way to run at this? Maybe we can start with Dee a little bit, and then we'll go around the room.
Yeah, look, again, I think my kind of view on this is that you almost have to abstract away from kind of unique situations that OpenAI had. And clearly, they gave a step function change to society in a lot of ways in terms of just thinking, in terms of how companies think about enhanced personalization and convenience, some of the healthcare outcomes, the financial services innovations that we're clearly in the middle of. Our board, for instance, it's a publicly traded board, a publicly traded company with a public board. There's a subcommittee clearly that thinks about all things, whether it's cyber policy, IT, data privacy. And I think that's we'll keep going back to this idea that the United States has a pretty efficient mesh system of regulating data, right? And that's been basically what's led to this AI revolution, is that we're now a society that's predominantly driven by microservices in the technology layer, where companies can communicate with each other, consumers can communicate with companies through APIs and through apps speaking to each other, companies speaking to each other, right? So that data flow is pretty well governed with the existing regulatory apparatus, if you will. So if we say that AI is just advanced statistics, and it's really the compute power, the NVIDIA chips, the sort of the hardware is getting so efficient now for the AI to run in memory, then you can abstract away from just wanting to have AI-specific regulations where foundational models are being uploaded to someone at a federal agency for them to audit, but rather go back to some of the things that Arsene was talking about, that CFPB already has a good way of thinking about disparate impact and redlining. The FCC and the FTC already have a good framework. And public company boards are pretty well trained and equipped to be able to have risk and compliance committees that look after kind of a lot of those issues on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, good. Andre, maybe, I could get you. So Dee certainly wants to tell a story about the virtues of the private sector. And at the University of Chicago, we believe in that too, right? So, but I take it, I would assume you're going to tell me in a second that you're a little more skeptical about these efforts to sort of create a kind of almost public spirited governance structure internally in these firms. Is that question clear? I hope. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Many of you might have heard about the term greenwashing, right? Where certain sustainability practices are being adopted, but actually they don't serve their purpose as they are intended. And we see similar concerns emerging in the space of corporate governance around responsible innovation. There is a growing kind of expert category, AI ethics officers, responsible AI experts that are being hired into companies to ensure compliance and oversight.
A
but
chief
also,
AI officer.
yes, and also certification programs that companies can sign up for and get a badge of honor to be, the ethical kind of innovation.
Sort of the AI
paradigm.
equivalent of lead certification.
Yes, something like so. You see the emergence of these kinds of services, yet
Yeah.
there are also questions how effective they are. I think a really good example, as we're talking a lot about data governance, is actually also the EU GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is one of the most comprehensive data protection laws globally. And it gives a lot of rights to the users, right? The right to access their data, the right to be forgotten, the right for data portability, and so on and so forth. So companies are actually doing their job in adopting these new policies by giving users certain choices. We have all seen the emergence of certain pop-up windows when we are going on websites, asking us if, to select our own settings, what kinds of cookies are being collected, and so on and so forth. But what has happened also is that there is a growing kind of fatigue amongst users who are overwhelmed to understand what their choices are, who are overwhelmed to go through all of the technical language to really comprehend actually what their agency is and what kind of choices would be informed. So although companies are doing their due diligence in order to follow those new compliances, actually it doesn't really translate a lot of times into an effective translation into AI literacy, which is a new field where actually the consumers, the end users, are being empowered to understand and control the impact of AI on their lives. And also in the same way, these new regulations can also lead companies to worse services in a way. Like user interface design has suffered a lot from these new regulations. So I think there is a lot to be said about how corporate entities are wrestling with the challenges of new AI regulations, both in good and bad ways. But I don't think that it should be only left up to those to make these informed decisions.
Okay. Thoughts around the room? Otherwise, I'm going to go to the next question. Please, Arsen, and then maybe Rachel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important is to view AI governance as beyond the checklist of compliance issue. That's something I advise a number of companies and help them implement their AI governance structure within their company. And some of the questions I get asked sometimes is, show me the specific law that says I need to do this. But really, it's not the law necessarily that's prompting this move, but rather the free market system where consumers are demanding trust, safety, and accountability in connection with AI, especially in the post-2020 world. And so on the one hand, you have the free market dictating, implement an AI governance structure in your company, but it's not without bite. So if a company goes on their website and says, we're committed to these principles, or here are the things that we're going to do to implement compliance, it's not just words on paper. Because if they're lying to consumers about what they're doing, there are enforcement authorities, not only in the state and federal level, that can bring an Unfair and Deceptive Practices Act lawsuit or enforcement action against the company, but also private statutes that can, where private cause of action can be brought against the company for engaging in these practices. So I think basically there's a balancing act here where both consumers and corporations, are essentially need to be honest and implement their compliance.
Rachel, thought? Yeah, please.
Yeah, just I think corporate governance done well can lead to good decision making. That's kind of the point, right? In a large organization, you need something in order to get to a good decision. And with the kind of onslaught of all these different compliance regimes, there needs to be a way to manage it. So we're talking about, compliance professionals and checkbox systems. They have to form part of it, because otherwise you kind of can't manage everything in a unique way and actually run your business. So it has to be manageable, and I think that's part of the governance process. But governance is not enough alone, and you need other checks and balances and other principles, like Andre is saying, and the importance of consumers and building up consumer knowledge, as well as the other elements that an organization is going to have to do, like transparency, Arsen was saying. I think so it's a part of it, but not enough.
Okay, good. All right, we're going to switch to the next question. And that question starts, what a good place to start. I run an undersea cable company. Okay, good. That's great. So we want to draw upon the deep expertise. Deep, you see what I did there? Okay. It's a jurisdictional question. So when you consider jurisdictional questions, are you referring to the source of the AI or the using of the AI? So let me broaden that question just a little, right? As we turn to regulation, and Arsen and Rachel gave us a sense of the multi-jurisdictional issues in Europe. It's obviously Europe and the UK. United States, it's obviously United States, but also individual states. Are there distinctive jurisdictional issues we think here that AI poses? Or is this sort of stuff we've been dealing with de-emphasized how much we've worked with data already? So is there something distinctive about AI with regard to potential overlaps or gaps with regard to jurisdictions? Maybe we can start with Arsen, then go to Rachel, see if Dee and Andre want to jump in.
Well, I know Rachel's going to mention the EU AI Act, so I won't steal her thunder on that about the jurisdictional effect, about outputs and what have you. But when it comes to the US perspective or global perspective, if you're operating or providing a service on an international level and directing products and services to a particular market, typically on a global level, there are extraterritorial jurisdictional reach of the laws. So in the privacy world, for example, most of the international laws say that you don't necessarily need a physical office or have your submarine in our waters to trigger the laws, but rather if you direct your products and services to our market, you're triggering our laws because you're having an impact on our consumers. Another thing to view from a jurisdictional perspective is where is your data source? Because if your data is collected, let's say from a particular state, from a consumer in California or in Colorado or Virginia and some of the other regulated states that have privacy laws, and you're going to use it to train an AI model or provide a service, that law could be triggered as well. So it's a little bit of a multi-domain approach where there's different laws that can be triggered depending on where the harm might have happened, where the data may have been collected from, or the jurisdiction that you're directing your products and services to.
Okay. Yeah, Rachel, please.
Yeah, it's a similar picture in the UK and the EU, depending on which laws engage. Obviously, the UK GDPR, we've had a few, or I say the Information Commissioner, our data regulators, a few skirmishes around the jurisdiction with regards to Clearview AI. Some of you may know that organization was using data scraped kind of globally, but did not have customers in the UK. And because it was part of the customers that it did have were sort of trials for law enforcement, there were some kind of jurisdictional questions, and actually the ISO so far have failed to establish that they have jurisdiction for that, even though the data was scraped, including individuals from the UK. So there's sort of various nexuses, but actually there's not a complete answer necessarily to the way in which AI works yet under data laws in the UK, and then it will, product safety laws and things will have a different regime. In the EU, we have the EU AI Act, which similarly tries to cast a broad net, and it doesn't automatically follow the same kind of jurisdictional principles, but it is broad enough to cover either where the AI affects people located in the EU, where it's placed on the market in the EU, or the output produced by an AI system It's used in the EU. And so they're trying to catch essentially where there could be an impact in the EU and cast that jurisdictional net as wide as possible. But there's this sort of leads on to the inevitable. But so what if we don't have reciprocal enforcement and reciprocal recognition of judgments between the jurisdiction in which that matters? Or, you know, so even if there is a regulatory decision, and so that then very much depends on who's trying to get into which markets and how globally coordinated these jurisdictional provisions end up being.
Yeah, I've taught the Yahoo case from many years ago, which you smile, it raises all those issues. Dee, there's a related question, so let me come to you on this. And the related question is given the proliferation of potential regulations, the jurisdictional uncertainty, how does that affect how someone like you designs products? Do you say we're going to design to the whatever's the most restrictive? Do you tailor to different markets? What's the approach there?
Yeah, look, I think in financial services broadly, the bar is pretty high in terms of how data is used in the United States. So the safest and cleanest way for us to build products is to ultimately go to the consumer and get consents.
Okay.
So when you have the consumer's consent that, hey, your bank transaction data or your credit score or how much you're investing or putting into roundups is going to be used to train an LLM, and if you're upfront around that, I think that is the safest way to go build that product, because then you can basically have a conversation with the consumer why we're using the data, how we're using it. Because you told us X, here is an insight. Because you told us Y, here's the next best offer, right? So that personalization, I mean, that's the power of AI for the consumer, right? Is that you're going to be, you're always going to have a co-pilot, if you will, helping you make decisions. And you're going to be 10X, 100X more knowledgeable and more kind of educated on the next best thing that you may be thinking about or doing. So to do that, the best way for us in terms of the 50-state approach that we see here in the States, where every state's got a say, and then you've got the federal oversight, is to go get the consent from the consumer, store that consent, have it auditable. So there's a lot of technology now being built on traceability, data lineage. You know, if I said, I give you permission on Monday, but then I change it on Wednesday, that needs to be auditable. And that needs to be, if a regulator is asking you, you need to be able to show that in an exam or under an enforcement guise, if you will. But if you do that, I think that's probably the safest you could play right now, barring a federal approach to AI.
Okay, good. So I heard that, and this will let me pick up another question, and I want to go to Andre if we could. And so this is the spin here is consumers are already fatigued and confused, right? After spending years clicking through GDPR notices, right? They can't do it anymore. So when Dee says he wants to ask for consent, I want to say, go away, or that's at least the question. How should we think about that? So is this vision of empowering consumers meaningful? Or are consumers, as the question puts it, fatigued and confused already?
That's a great question. I think the fatigue and confusion, it really comes from the fact that the landscape of so-called responsible innovation, right, in AI governance is currently pretty much limited. First of all, to regulators trying to make sense how to most efficiently safeguard the user, and then also the corporations who are adopting those practices. But what we already discussed, right, is that there are boundaries to that approach. And what is needed in order also to activate basically user agency is it's almost more like a cultural aspect to AI governance, where you need new incentives to educate end users why it is important to care about these new regulations and choices and how they can care about them, right? So we see the emergence of new educational programs, right? There's a growing interest in bringing AI literacy, for example, to schools, to already expose children to some of the basic questions, similar to how we are introducing other concepts such as human rights and democracy in curricula. There could be public awareness campaigns where governmental organizations could actually make some outreach and help produce certain experiences like movies or events that really allow people to understand what is at stake. Why this is important is not only to empower the user to make choices, but also it has something to do with who is involved or included in policy decision making, right? Who gets a seat at a table when those regulations are being crafted? And I think that AI literacy really enables more people to engage in public discussions on AI policy and also hopefully create informed citizens who can advocate for laws or regulations that they reflect the public's needs and interests.
Okay, you and I are both educators. We believe, but do you think we have a good track record so far on digital literacy?
Me personally?
No. I'm not asking you to confess your errors. I mean, look, if you look at, say, social media and how good or poor a job we've done of educating people with regard to social media, right? I mean, a little humility, and then we say, oh no, we're going to do AI literacy, and we're going to be so much. Is that unfair?
No, this area, it's a form of expertise that I believe is in its infancy, right? And we see this even in higher education, where the emergence of generative AI tools has caused a lot of disruption. We see even students using these technologies without much understanding what their limitations are, and that they can potentially also produce, false information. And so there is a lot going on right now in the space, which actually shows us that digital literacy and to its extension AI literacy is something that we haven't done a good job yet actually in mainstreaming to the public. And I see that actually as a major area also, which will see a growth in the future, because we are seeing the plateau of the discourse on AI ethics right now. I see that we have done a great job in identifying a lot of the concerns and principles. Yet now there needs to be a new step forward, understanding how these principles can actually be implemented and made useful.
Okay. I'm looking at the clock. We've got 8 minutes. We got 4 panelists. I think we're going to do 2 minutes. Tell me our wrap up. What are the last thoughts you want to convey about the topics we've been talking about? And I think we'll just go in the order we started. So 2 minutes, Rachel. What is the last thing you think it's important to convey to the audience about these issues?
I think that when we talk about AI regulation, there are 2 sort of different layers. There's the harmonizing layer on top, AI regulation, but then we shouldn't forget the existing frameworks for each of the kind of different sectors or different specialisms, because that's where a lot of the nuance will be developed, even where we start to see AI specific regimes. And so listening, there's a lot of noise around things. And so working out the kind of authoritative sources, who you need to listen to kind of get a feel of where things are going, so that even if you are, not on top of every exact specification, you have a good sense of, the direction of travel of where AI regulation is going and understanding the key principles. I think that stands you in good stead to understand the ways it's going. And the other thing I just echo, I think I love the idea of pushing AI literacy that Andre was talking about. I think it's so key. I don't know where that impetus is going to come from. So certainly in the UK, we hear about sort of, especially an online safety regime with literacy and empowering users to know more about how to protect themselves. But the funding isn't there yet. So we, I think, as a society, really have to push for that to come, so that we can all empower ourselves in addition to what all the regulators are doing.
Okay, thank you so much. Arsen.
Yeah, I think education is very important in this area, not just for consumers, but also businesses to be educated on the risks of AI. On the consumer level, I think the good thing is that some of the privacy regulators, like the California Privacy Protection Agency, are making a public effort campaign to educate the members of the public. I also think that it starts at home. If you have children, you need to teach them about online safety, use of AI, deep fakes, etc. It's certainly not a conversation that I have at home with my children. But also what's important is to educate businesses. I think the EU is probably a little bit more far advanced where when you talk to companies, privacy, AI, and some of these issues are embedded in their culture. And it probably has to do with what happened post-World War II and the Stasi. It's become a cultural thing. I think in the US, we're a little far behind. I think companies, they think of sometimes privacy as an afterthought, and then some are very pro-privacy and they want to comply, but the problem is they don't have clarity on what is compliance because the enforcement environment is a little opaque. So I think there's education that's needed on both sides, and I think you know, for companies to implement AI compliance and the privacy laws, they need to get appropriate stakeholders involved internally in the company and have top to bottom direction on why some of these issues are important, and for workers to get the appropriate training that they need to understand the implications of AI and data privacy and interconnected issues.
Okay, good. Thank you. Dee, please.
Yeah, look, I think my view is that I'm super optimistic about the application of artificial intelligence into the application layer, which means how are consumers using it. I think there's an incredible set of use cases across financial services, healthcare, lifespan, living better financial lives that consumers are just starting to get a flavor of. The last year, year and a half, and the last 10 years have really been the foundational approach of getting to the table stakes layer. I agree with everything said about financial literacy. I think we're a driver of that. If you think about who's really used ChatGPT, it's about 5 to 10% of the population. I think getting that to the masses has incredible implications for society. We live in a digital society, so I think the conversation here is about how do we make sure that we're accelerating into the future. A digital society, artificial intelligence can be an incredible tool for us to do a lot of great things. Right? It's going to be deflationary. If you think about that, you know, all the things that are happening in our monetary policy, if you think about what's happening in the financial markets, companies are expected now to reduce their operating expenditure with the use of artificial intelligence. So I think all of that combined is going to have massive implications for society, but there will be substitution effects. And that's why we have to continue to be optimistic about the application layer and really the new things that we haven't really even foreseen in terms of the use cases that we have here.
Okay, good. Andre, you're going to get the last word on this.
Amazing. Well, you know, I think speaking again about AI literacy, I would say in an ideal future where we'll see us reaping the most benefits of AI technologies, what I would like to see, and I think is necessary, is a deeper understanding of both AI's capacities and limitations, that more broadly, we can recognize AI is not a magic tool that can solve all of our problems, but it comes with its own opportunities and risks, and they need to be delineated more appropriately. That includes understanding what AI tools can and cannot do to help prevent misunderstandings and unrealistic expectations to these tools, and also developing better measures for social impact, right? That can complement some of the currently existing governance practices, which are often more focused on optimizing for profit. So I see also here a new paradigm emerging where we're looking more and more into more holistic measurements that can also take into account the social impact of these tools.
Okay, so good. Thank you so much. This has been great. I've really enjoyed this. I want to thank our panelists, Rachel, Dee, Arsen, and Andre. I want to thank the Center for Applied Artificial Intelligence for organizing this, Emily Bembenek, Lauren Doan, Sudhir Polaru. And I want to thank our audience. It's great to have people come. Fantastic set of issues. I gather, I'm looking at the chat, that there's going to be a follow-up email. I'm sure you're eagerly awaiting that. So make sure you see that and respond to whatever they're asking for. And I think with that, I think we are done. So thank you so much.